Walking your dog through the peaceful wonders of nature is usually a serene experience, but beneath the tranquility of this routine activity lies predators waiting for an easy meal. From alligators bursting out from the shoreline to bears charging out from the bushes, sometimes walking your dog can lead to deadly encounters. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. In today's episode, we go over 3 times people have been attacked by wild animals while walking their dog. Welcome to Final Affliction. Cassandra Cline, known as Sassy, was a 45-year-old kindergarten teacher. She was planning on retiring from her job in just 1 year's time, something she was looking forward to, but she never got to enjoy her retirement. She lived and worked in Endicott, in upstate New York. She had worked in the local school system for 16 years and was currently a much-loved teacher at George Johnson Elementary School in Endicott. But she and her husband liked to spend their spare time in their holiday home on Hilton Head Island in South Carolina. The island is a barrier island in Beaufort County. It is a popular vacation destination with miles of beachfront overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. There is a plethora of wildlife, including manatees and loggerhead turtles, that frequent the surrounding waters. In fact, beachside residents are not permitted to use artificial light at nighttime during the summer months to shield the turtles from navigating the wrong way when they come up onto the beach to lay their eggs. But South Carolina is also home to a population of around 100,000 alligators. Residents living on Hilton Head Island are used to seeing the alligators crossing the road from one body of water to the next. There are thought to be a few thousand on the island, and whilst they can be an incredible sight, they are also incredibly dangerous. Signs are erected near ponds and lakes, warning people to stay away from the water. Residents know to keep small children and animals away from the lakesides. Cassandra was on vacation at her holiday home in Sea Pines Plantation. It was a gated community on the island, encompassing 5,200 acres of private residential grounds. On site were 4 golf courses and beautiful walkways with wooden benches looking out over the lagoons. Cassandra and her husband planned to retire there and had visited many times before. Cassandra knew the dangers of alligators and always went out of her way to avoid them. She walked a safe distance from any freshwater habitats and never did any activities like feeding the local ducks. But on August 20th, 2018, something terrible happened. Instinct took over. She made a fatal mistake. It was a Monday morning, and the residential estate was quiet. Cassandra stepped out of her home to take her beloved dog, Kylie, for a walk. Her 4-legged companion was a Shetland sheepdog, a devoted member of the family. According to her mother, Cassandra wasn't able to have children, and so her dogs were her babies. She loved them dearly. Just 2 weeks before that fateful day, one of her dogs had died. She had been devastated at the loss and now only had Kylie by her side. She would do anything to look after her pets and was as devoted to them as they were to her. The walk Cassandra was on took them around the side of a lagoon, a large lake along the golf course that was home to a 9-foot 2-inch alligator. Cassandra kept her distance from the water. She knew the risks in South Carolina's freshwater lagoons. Witnesses reported seeing her walking at least 14 feet from the edge of the water, something she always did. But her dog wasn't necessarily aware of the danger, as she sniffed the undergrowth and followed her nose around the bases of the surrounding tree trunks. Also, out and about before 8 a.m. that morning was a Sea Pines greenkeeper on the golf course. He was working on the 13th green as Cassandra and her dog walked around to the other side of the lagoon. The footsteps of Kylie near the lagoon's bank alerted the alligator to the potential prey. The vibrations reverberated down the bank and into the water. The alligator's keen senses picked them up, and it silently moved closer. In the warmer months, alligators are much more active. The heat of the summer increases their metabolisms, and they need to eat more regularly to maintain their function. They are more aggressive hunters as a result, and are more dangerous. This particular alligator could see the 2 walking side by side along the bank, just yards from the water's edge. The alligator was camouflaged, its dark-colored skin merging into the murky water and hidden amongst the shadowy reflections on the water's surface. Only the knobbly head protruded out of the water as it floated along silently. It watched the dog intently, its eyes unblinking. Then Cline pottered down to the water, and, as quick as a flash, the alligator leapt from the lagoon. In that split second, the dog jumped backwards and the alligator missed out, but it somehow managed to grab hold of Cline's leash. The dog scrambled on the grass as the alligator pulled her towards the water. Cassandra screamed and instinctively ran down the grassy bank to save her dog. She didn't think about her own safety. She just saw her dog in danger and ran to help. The golf course greenkeeper heard the screams and looked up. He could see the commotion and the battle between Cassandra and the alligator on the other side of the lagoon from where he was. A tug of war ensued, with Cassandra pulling as hard as she could on Cline's lead and the alligator pulling back. The strength and power from the reptile pulled both the woman and the dog into the water. Cassandra was now knee-deep in the lagoon. She was dangerously close to the powerful jaws of one of America's apex predators. But she wasn't about to let her dog go. She had already lost one just a couple of weeks before. Incredibly, as she fumbled with the leash, she managed to unclip it from Cline's collar. This released the dog, who leapt onto dry land. But when the dog was pulled free, the alligator swiped its head to the side and immediately latched onto Cassandra. She screamed again as she was pulled further into the water. It had a firm grip around her lower leg. The worker on the green immediately pulled out his mobile phone and dialed 911.
911, where's your emergency?
Yeah, there's a lady being attacked by an alligator.
Where at, sir?
I'm in Sea Pines.
Okay, where at in Sea Pines?
Hole number 13 of the golf course. I'm not sure what the road is.
Okay, you said that she's being attacked by an alligator?
Yes, drag her in the water.
Okay, how big was it?
It's probably about 8 feet, maybe 7.
It's dragging her into the water?
And she's in the water right now.
Okay, what hole are you on?
It's a hole number 13 up near the green. I'm driving to where the road is so I can tell you the road. I'll be at the road in like 30 seconds.
Okay, was anybody still out there with her?
No, there's one other person there. They just, I mean, what do you do? Just jump in the water? I don't know.
Whilst he was on the call, he saw Cassandra being dragged further into the water. His heart leapt as the woman disappeared beneath the surface and the dog watched on from the safety of the bank. The operator immediately dispatched emergency services to the scene. Underwater, Cassandra was fighting for her life. She punched and poked the alligator on the head and snout, but it refused to let go. She could feel herself growing weak and faint. Her lungs were about to burst, but still the alligator held her firmly in its grip, just below the surface. In less than a minute, Cassandra had drowned in the lagoon, whilst the worker at the 13th hole helplessly looked on. When emergency services arrived, they could see Cassandra in the water. They managed to catch the alligator, shoot it, and pull Cassandra from the lagoon. They immediately began CPR, but tragically, it was too late. Cassandra had drowned. She had significant injuries to her arms and hands, where she had bravely fought the 9-foot reptile. Cline the dog was unharmed in the attack. When Cassandra's family were informed of the incident, they broke down in tears. Her sister broke the news to her mother at work. They couldn't believe that this kind of freak accident had happened to such a lovely young woman. It broke them. Cassandra was always smiling. She was always happy and would lend a hand to anybody in need. For this to happen to the kindest, most upbeat person they knew was just devastating. It was only the second fatal alligator attack known to have happened in South Carolina. It was an incredibly rare incident, but one which shook the local community and all those who knew Cassandra. As for her colleagues and pupils in the elementary school where she worked, the tragedy also hit hard. She was an inspiration to her students who will never forget her and the tragic day that she met her terrifying final affliction.
With the exception of his dog, Daniel worked alone. The rough, rugged terrain of the Alaskan mountains were his perfect office. He used his cabin in Turnagain as a base and set off on foot from it each day to work on the trail. The cabin was a couple of miles from a paved road that connected the community of Hope to the Seward Highway. The picturesque spot was about 25 miles southeast of Anchorage. On July 29, 2020, Daniel awoke early. He looked out through his cabin's window. He could see that he was blessed with clear blue skies for the day. He dressed in his gear, putting on his sturdy boots and clipping his bear spray canister onto his belt. It is believed he also placed his handgun in his backpack. During his construction work, he preferred to keep bear spray on him rather than a firearm. A shotgun or rifle weighed him down and got in the way. Daniel didn't plan on being out for long and decided he would return to the cabin for lunch later in the day. He picked up his water bottle and after a quick breakfast, he whistled to his dog and stepped outside. The two of them set off towards the path he was constructing. It was less than a mile from the cabin. Sawing down saplings and lopping off branches, Daniel gradually inched along the route he was carving through the great Alaskan wilderness. His dog carelessly sniffed around the surrounding trees and wandered through the clearing as Daniel worked. As midday loomed, the dense foliage sheltered Daniel from the growing heat of the rising sun. It was tiring work, and he paused for a breather, wiping the sweat from his brow and taking a sip from his water bottle, when suddenly, a brown bear came crashing through the undergrowth. Daniel barely had time to react. He fumbled for the bear spray, pointing it directly at the charging grizzly. He emptied the entire contents of the canister before the bear flattened him to the floor. Daniel struggled to breathe. The full force of the bear had knocked the wind from his lungs, and now it stood pushing down on him, its giant paws pressed firmly on his chest. Daniel kicked and thrashed about, trying desperately to hit the bear. He smacked the bear again and again on the snout, but this only enraged the bear more. It let out a deep, guttural growl and opened its jaws. Daniel could see saliva dripping from its jowls as it lowered its head menacingly. Ferociously, it bit into Daniel's face. He let out a yell as a tooth hit bone. Again, the bear bit down and scraped its claws over Daniel's chest. The attack that ensued was likely brutal and ferocious, but no one knows quite what happened to Daniel. His tragic death was both a shock to those who knew him and a mystery to others. His dog found its way home, and when Daniel's wife saw the dog arrive home without Daniel, she hurriedly called his friends. None of them had seen him. Working within such dense vegetation, it is likely that Daniel didn't see the bear until it was right upon him. If he did have his handgun in his backpack like his friend said he did, then there definitely wouldn't have been enough time to use it. Maybe it was his dog that alerted him to the bear. Maybe Daniel had time to retreat a little. Maybe the dog provoked the attack. No one quite knows. After Daniel's wife called his friends, raising the alarm, they went to check on him. They assumed that he may have fallen and sprained an ankle or broken a leg. Walking past his cabin, they followed the path that Daniel had carved through the undergrowth. Little more than a mile along the path, his friends stopped in their tracks. They had found Daniel's body on the ground, bloodied and lifeless. His injuries were consistent with a brown bear attack. In those desperately sad and heart-stopping moments, they called the local police department to report the terrible news. Daniel's wife and friends were in utter disbelief that he was gone. He was such an experienced outdoorsman. They knew his knowledge and hunting expertise had served him well throughout the years, but now their worlds came crashing down. State wildlife biologists arrived on the scene. The stench of pepper spray was still in the air. The empty canister was found about 15 feet from Daniel's body. A thorough scout of the area found nothing that would have attracted a bear, such as a moose carcass or other food sources. Daniel had been working relatively close to 6 Mile Creek, a salmon spawning stream, but officials didn't consider it close enough to the attack site for Daniel to be considered prey. The puzzling evidence found by field experts was that both black bear and brown bear DNA were found on Daniel's body. It is usual for these bears to tolerate each other, and often black bears give the larger grizzlies a wide berth. However, with evidence of both bears present at the attack site, some locals considered them to have attacked Daniel together, a form of teamwork amongst bears. This, however, is highly unlikely. Bears are largely solitary animals. They do not hunt in pairs or groups, and subspecies never socially mix with one another. In fact, brown bears have been known to kill black bears. So what exactly did happen to Daniel? The most likely explanation is that he unknowingly disturbed a large female brown bear which attacked him. She wasn't necessarily preying on him, but had been startled and had felt threatened. She was eliminating this threat from her territory by attacking the intruder. Uninterested in eating him, she left the kill site. If bears cannot eat their prey then and there, they often cover it up, hiding it from other predators and scavengers in order to return to it later. There was no evidence of Daniel's body being partially buried or hidden with dirt or foliage. Bear spray may sting the eyes and nose when in direct contact, but it can also attract bears. In this case, a black bear was probably attracted either by the smell of the spray or by the fresh kill and made its way to Daniel's body. This would explain the presence of both bear subspecies at the site. But why was the bear spray ineffective during the initial attack? The regional wildlife supervisor for the Alaskan Department of Fish and Game, who was tasked with investigating Daniel's death, suspected the bear spray was faulty. The spray is sold by Costco stores in Anchorage and is manufactured by a company called UDAP. There had been concerns that some cans manufactured between March and August of that year could have been defective. There is also strong criticism over the effectiveness of bear spray, particularly regarding wind direction, which could result in the spray being blown away from the target. A flyby of the area where Daniel had been killed the following day found 2 black bears and 1 brown bear within several miles of Daniel's location. It's probable that many other bears were also in close proximity, but these were not spotted by officials. The DNA evidence collected from swabs of Daniel's body and clothing pointed towards 2 female bears. A week after the attack, wildlife biologists shot and killed 3 female black bears and 1 female grizzly. DNA from one of the black bears matched that found at the kill site. DNA from that brown bear did not. Following a bear attack, there is always some debate about the use of pepper spray. Some swear by it, others say it is foolish to go into bear territory without a high-caliber firearm. Although rangers and wildlife experts always recommend the use of bear spray over a firearm, research has shown that bear spray can actually be an attractant for some bears. Scientists studying bears in Alaska's Katmai National Park in the 1990s found that the majority of the bears they observed actually rolled and wriggled around in spray the researchers had sprayed onto the ground. They were vigorously scent rubbing their entire bodies in the spray residue. Sprayed directly from a can, however, results in the stinging of the eyes and nose, and this is thought to deter an approaching bear. The cause of Daniel's attack remains a mystery. It is still not known whether the attack was defensive or predatory. What has been determined, however, is that he was killed by a female brown bear, who are notorious for mauling anyone who stands between her and her cubs, often leading to the unfortunate victim's final affliction.
Before we get to the fate that befell Shizuka Matsuki, we need to take a look at the circumstances that led the 47-year-old to that particular pond on June 8, 2018. Shizuka loved her home in Florida. Ever since their family moved to the United States from Japan, she'd been entranced by the stunningly wild nature of the Everglades. When her son, Katana, was still a schoolboy, they'd go off looking for turtles that got stranded on busy roads to bring them back to the safety of the water. She was an avid bird watcher, loved to fish, and she brought every hurt, lost, or abandoned animal home that she came across in her many trips out into the swamps. In the years since Katana had gone off to college, she'd acquired 3 rescue dogs, Junior, Paco, and Momo. Paco was a pit bull who was so violent that he was set to be euthanized, but under Shizuka's care, he'd become a lovable cuddle bug, hell-bent on drooling his beloved mistress to pieces. She often joked that if she ever won the lottery, she'd spend all of the money on opening an animal sanctuary so that she could save every animal in Florida. The neighborhood that she and her husband, Yokio, lived in was not the safest or friendliest one. Even though their closest neighbors adored the Matsukis, Shizuka had met some very attacks when she was out walking her dogs at the surrounding ponds and streams. Once, a woman even tried to run over Momo with her car. After this incident, Yokio insisted that Shizuka stop walking their dogs anywhere near these hostile areas. So she started loading them into her car and driving a mile or 2 away to walk them in safer places instead. This arrangement went very well for quite a few months. Shizuka enjoyed the unfamiliar scenery and the opportunity to run across some new critters and creatures. That is, until April. A handful of gator sightings made the rounds as people shared photos and video footage they'd captured on their phones. One behemoth alligator was spotted, a 12-foot monster that had taken up residence in Silver Lake's Rotary Nature Park. Since he knew that this park was an area his wife liked to frequent, Yukio advised her to stay away for the time being, at least until he got back from his business trip. He would only be away for a week, so it wasn't too much to ask that Shizuka wait a few days until Yukio could accompany her on their walks. But the week dragged by, and the three canines were getting restless. Shizuka did take them out on short walks around her immediate neighborhood as often as she could, but they were not so easily satisfied. The trio were used to more freedom, especially since Shizuka took them out for walks where they were so far removed from people that it was safe for them to be taken off their leashes for a swim in the many waterways around Florida. And Shizuka herself was starting to get frustrated too. She and her dogs were out and about on most days, so an entire week spent almost entirely indoors made them all miserable. When she got up on Friday morning, Shizuka decided enough was enough. She wasn't going to hide inside her house from a few lizards. She'd seen plenty of them before, and her mutts were more than capable of warning her and protecting her if anything were to happen to her. When she grabbed the leashes, Momo, Paco, and Junior were beside themselves with joy. They didn't wait for Shizuka's command. They jumped into the back of the car the moment she opened the door for them. They yipped and howled for the whole 15-minute drive until they reached Silver Lakes. Shizuka parked her car in the lot and walked the happy trio on their leashes until they were well out of sight of people. Before long, the canines were all soaking wet, covered in mud, and properly winded. Every now and then, Shizuka threw a rubber ball for them to catch and bring back to her. Eventually, they reached a good-sized pond. The dogs were nearly dry from the dip they took in a smaller pond some ways back, and Shizuka thought it would be a good idea to allow them one last swim before heading back to the car. They could dry off again on the walk back. The day was so hot that they'd probably be completely dry when they reached the parking lot again. She hurled the ball into the pond, and the dogs took off after it. But Paco, who reached the water's edge first, came to a skidding halt. The other two braked to a stop behind him, too. They whined and pawed nervously at the muddy bank, unwilling to go inside after their prized ball. Shizuka sighed. She'd seen this behavior before when they came across snakes. The dogs always whined and paced around nervously when they came across reptiles. Luckily, Shizuka had none of the same reservations about snakes. Once she chased the thing off, the dogs would go in and get the ball so that they could start their walk back. But after inspecting the bank, Shizuka couldn't find any signs of snakes or lizards, and she didn't see any gators resting in the water either. She decided that the three dogs were just tired. After all, they'd been out running for more than 2 hours by now. So she stepped into the water. The ball had drifted close to the bank, and she only had to go up to her knees before she could reach it. But Shizuka missed the predator hiding in the weeds, only a few feet away from where she stepped into the mucky water. Her dogs hadn't seen anything either, but they sure smelled it in the vicinity. When their master took those first 2 steps into the pond, they let out a chorus of howls to get her to come back. Shizuka took another step, her hand already reaching for the yellow sphere. But just as her hand closed around the ball, there was an almighty splash from behind her. She didn't even have the chance to turn around before almost a half a ton worth of reptilian body knocked her head first into the dark water. From behind the weeds, the very 12-foot alligator that witnesses had shared on social media propelled out at the prey that had so willingly walked right into its territory. It was planning on waiting for one of the dogs to come close enough to strike, but it wasn't going to say no to the much larger target that walked in instead. As soon as Shizuka's body was submerged, Momo jumped in after her. But as soon as the thing bowled her over, it had wrapped its scaly body around her before she could claw her way to the bank. When Momo reached his favorite human, she was already in the throes of the alligator's fatal death roll. He paddled in and tried to claw onto the barreling lizard's body, but a heavy tail struck him down. In mid-turn, the gator's jaws glanced off his rib cage. Momo retreated, bleeding heavily from the open gash on his ribs. In the water, Shizuka had not even had the chance to catch some air. Once the animal had her in its grip, she was consumed by an impossibly strong pressure from all sides. What little air she did have in her lungs was expelled by the force and the intense spinning through the deep. She felt her chest shatter under the immense compression just before she lost consciousness. Once her body went limp, the animal swam Shizuka away to find a more secluded spot on the other side of the pool. But Momo, Paco, and Junior were relentless. They continued to make an immense amount of noise for an hour before someone finally came by. An older man out for a mid-morning stroll saw the commotion on the banks. By now, Momo was heaving and coughing from the constant barking and the stress it placed on the bite mark that had also bruised his ribs. The man who came upon the scene immediately put the pieces together. All 3 dogs were wearing collars. They were obviously well cared for, and there was no sign of their owner in sight. He'd also spotted a car in the parking lot, so there must have been a person with the dogs at some point. And then, on the other side of the pond, he saw the scaly back of a massive alligator slide into the water, disappearing below the surface when he came closer to investigate. He called the authorities, and they arrived within minutes of the call. While Animal Control rounded up the panicked dogs, police ran the car's plates and discovered that it belonged to the Matsukas. The phone call to Yokio sent chills up his spine. Despite his warnings, Shizuka had gone out anyway, and he knew in his gut that the police were probably right. If it wasn't an alligator, then she'd possibly drowned in some other way. He got on the earliest flight he could catch and arrived back in Florida that very night, just as authorities announced that they had found Shizuka's remains. She was missing an arm, and a large chunk was torn out of her midriff. It took another 3 days after the discovery to finally catch the beast that killed Shizuka. The parts of Shizuka that were missing from her body were found in the animal's stomach and were sent to the funeral home so that they could be buried with the rest of her in a closed casket service. The church that hosted Shizuka Matsuka's funeral had to bring in extra seats to accommodate everyone that showed up. Her good deeds did not stop at saving animals. Shizuka touched every life she came into contact with, and her son, Katana, made sure that she would get her biggest wish after all. He opened the Shizuka's Plan Foundation, just like Shizuka always wanted before meeting her terrifying final affliction.